I tell you what, it's not like the olden days. I'm Jake,
I'm Rosie.
and this is our podcast on Red Dwarf. One of my favourite trivia points about Red Dwarf is that it was commissioned by Janet Street Porter when she was in charge of BBC Two, and that certainly makes a lot of sense to me. It takes someone with some vision who sees the world in a very special way to have the faith to commission a space-set sitcom. But Janet Street Porter did it anyway, and it originally had a run of 6 series between 1988 and 1993, and we weren't really aware of it at that time. We were both very small children and didn't tend to watch things usually quite so late at night. But like Blackadder, evidently our father watched it. What I remember of Red Dwarf's original run is seeing our father watch Red Dwarf 6, what turned out to be the episodes Sirens and Legion. And what I remembered from that was that there were 4 main characters, and one of them was called Crichton. And I came away with the impression that Crichton was kind of the main one and in charge and driving all the action. And you can see why I might have come away thinking that after that point in the show, can't you?
Yes.
Like Blackadder, we picked up Red Dwarf when they repeated the whole thing shortly after reaching the end of its original run. And that's what happened. They showed series 1 to 6 through in the mid-90s, except the episode Sirens, as it turned out, which was rather annoying at the time. And we picked it up and enjoyed it then. And unlike with Blackadder, one of the reasons that they were repeating it at that point was to see if it was worth getting everyone back together and resuming it, doing a new series, a couple of new series. And like with Blackadder, seeing about releasing it on BBC Video. So obviously the ratings were quite successful enough that they did release it all on BBC Video in the mid-90s. They made a couple of special videos, the Smeg-Ups and the Smeg-Outs, with the bloopers from the show, and a Red Dwarf fan club was started, which Rosie and our mother joined, and it did gain the popularity that the BBC was hoping it would, and 2 new series were commissioned, series 7 and 8, off the back of that newfound popularity, and things went on from there really, and there'll be a few more details about that later.
What do you think was the first episode you watched?
Properly, the very first episode of all, The End, on the repeat run.
Was it? Because I think you watched that series without me, and then you and Mummy and Daddy were all talking about Red Dwarf, which you'd watched without me. And I was interested because there was a cat in it, and I was saying I wanted to watch it, and I wanted to know about this cat, and everyone was telling me, oh well, he's played by a person, he's not like a normal cat, and he's got a cat's teeth. And some silly grown-up was telling me he had a tail. And I remember watching series 2 and waiting for him to turn up. And what's the one where he's got like this baseball bat or something and he's saying, here, mousy, mousy, mousy?
That is his debut in series 2 in Crichton after a few minutes of runtime.
That makes a lot of sense because he was there and everyone said, oh look, here's the cat. And I was like, well, where's his tail? You said he had a tail. And then everyone was like, oh, I guess he doesn't have a tail. And I didn't understand at all why he was a cat. You actually have to watch the first episode and Norman Lovett will explain it to you. And after I'd seen that, I felt much happier with the situation, and I didn't really mind that he didn't have a tail anymore. But that's what I remember, sitting around waiting for this cat person with a tail, and he took ages to turn up, and then he didn't even have a tail.
When I watched The End, on the beginning of the repeat run, The End being the title of the first episode, that's the kind of show that Red Dwarf is, I kept thinking, well, where's Crichton? I was quite satisfied that Rimmer, Lister and the cat were the other 3 main characters that I'd seen in Red Dwarf 6. But where was Crichton? Oh, at last I thought when we started series 2, he's turning up. And then he did, and I thought, that's not Crichton. He's completely different. It's just his head looks slightly similar. And then when we got to the start of Series 3, backwards, and we got Rimmer and Crichton starting their driving test, I thought, that's it.
I wasn't particularly expecting Crichton because I didn't know anything about him. And I remember when we were watching Series 3 thinking, is that supposed to be the same character as that person with the similar looking head that was in Series 2? Because I hadn't remembered his name, so that was very different.
A word about the main cast, one by one. Chris Barry as Arnold Rimmer. As I think I said on the Blackadder podcast, I am overall a fan of Chris Barry and his talents, the foremost of which is probably impressions, but he certainly isn't devoid of other talents. And a show like Red Dwarf, as I was saying when we were watching it through recently, really is driven by the core cast and their relationships and their interactions, particularly, of course, the first series. And if the cast hadn't worked and gelled and managed to successfully do the first series and make the characters work and interact properly, it would have flopped there, because the first series really is just the characters wandering around the spaceship interacting in various ways. So the cast should always be praised for that. And of course that's not exclusively about Chris Barry, that's about all of them. But whatever good things there are to say about Chris Barry in particular, there is one rather unfortunate shortcoming he has in playing Rimmer, and that is he isn't good enough, or he doesn't think enough about playing a hologram. And if you want to see someone playing a hologram very successfully, very carefully, very believably, you must watch Dean Stockwell in Quantum Leap. But playing the role of Rimmer requires you to do things like not lean on stuff, not put your feet on the table, not brush past things all the time you're acting. And unfortunately, Chris Barry isn't careful enough to do that. And the other big problem with Rimmer as a hologram character is Rob Grant and Doug Naylor, the creators, often forget about it, don't incorporate it into the script. And there are bits of script where they've obviously forgotten, and even if they don't require Rimmer touches something directly, he'll often make reference to doing things that he obviously isn't physically capable of doing. And those two factors together, they don't write the hologram stuff properly, he doesn't play the hologram stuff properly. It's rather unfortunate for the effect of Rimmer as a hologram character.
I can't see the point in having the idea if you're not going to carry it through.
Yes, indeed. It is potentially quite interesting. Rimmer, as we know from the show, has always been very frustrated about his life not going the way he wanted it to and feeling he didn't have control over it, blaming others for his shortcomings. And then as a hologram, that's very much amplified and he has no control over his life or his death. He can't touch things, he can't do what he wants to do. He's reliant on the scooters. He feels even more out of touch with the world than he did when he was alive. But they don't really carry it through, which is a shame.
He touches things all the time, doesn't he? I always think of the episode Marooned in particular when we talk about that. It's on the Smegups tape, the 10 most asked questions about Red Dwarf, where a lot of them are pedantic people wanting to know, why did this happen, why did that happen? Like the Itchy and Scratchy convention on The Simpsons. And the question is, how come Rimmer can smell the camphor wood when holograms can't smell? That's really not all it is, though, in that episode. He also presses the button on the intercom when he's trying to send out a distress call, and he makes reference to finding food and first aid kit and things, and I always think, well, it must have all been in open cupboards and stuff if he's found that. But of course, they do remember that he's a hologram and he doesn't need the fire and he doesn't need food himself, so it's very weird to remember but forget at the same time.
Yes, it's okay. Things like I went here and took this when the Scutters are around, and you can think, oh well, the Scutters did that with him. But when they're marooned on Starbug, just Rimmer and Lister, there's no way that Rimmer can be opening cupboards. And as you say, that's a script problem. But I think Chris pressing the button on the communicator when he's doing his Mayday Mayday sequence is really Chris's fault. Obviously, they haven't thought in the script should Rimmer be using the radio, but he could very easily sit there and just talk into it without pressing anything. So that's a good example, Marooned, of both aspects of the hologram aspect not really working, not really being thought about and brought together properly.
Yes, we've gone off into a bit of a problem we have with the show, but it's a really brilliant show and it's very, very funny. And the list of things that Rimmer has found for Lister to eat is very funny, with the packet of soggy crisps and a pot noodle and dog food and things, and the way he delivers it makes it funnier than perhaps it might otherwise be.
Another thing Marooned is good for is the excellent interplay between Chris Barrie and Craig Charles, which really is the central relationship of the show, or certainly it is originally, and they like to remember that it is later on, when appropriate. So that's a good thing about Marooned, and it's a lot about the first series and the second series. Rimmer and Lister, they work, they carry the show. You can see in what ways they are similar, and in what ways they're very different, and in what ways their interactions with each other actually help them in their lives, and in what ways they find them very frustrating and do get on each other's nerves so much. So that's always a good thing about the show, and Chris Barrie, of course, is a very big part of that. That's one of the good things to say about him. And so is Craig Charles. The thing about playing Rimmer in particular, which Chris Barrie usually manages to do so well, particularly in the early days, is not to make him really unlikable, vindictive, the kind of Roy Slater in the Only Fools and Horses flashbacks character that everyone just hates and gets on their nerves and has no redeeming qualities. I think Chris Barrie was really good at making us feel for Rimmer and care about Rimmer, despite the various ways in which he is a bit of a nuisance and not a good person to have around and be stuck forever with. So that's always a good thing. But of course, one of the big problems we have with the later seasons of 21st century stuff is that Rimmer becomes far too much an unpleasant caricature of his former self, and Chris is forced into playing, as I always put it, the Pratt version of Rimmer in practically every episode, sort of Red Dwarf 10 onwards. And that's one of the very disappointing things I think about the later seasons. And that's particularly frustrating because I do enjoy, when I watch through Red Dwarf 1 to 6, Rimmer's journey that he has as a post-death Rimmer, where he does, in the end, come to realise and take responsibility for his own faults. It's really in the episode in Red Dwarf 6, Rimmer World, I noticed that he freely and without question takes responsibility for his own shortcomings for the first time ever. He doesn't try to make any excuses about how terrible Rimmer World is. He just admits it all very freely and admits he hates it. When Lister lists the things that none of the Rimmers are, kind, brave, intelligent, that sort of thing, Rimmer goes, they're all crimes here, like he's finally accepted himself. And there's a lot of build-up on that journey, so it's a shame to see all that character development thrown out of the window in later seasons by lazy Doug Naylor just coming back to the default Rimmer and making him worse and worse.
Yeah, I mean, even really early on, he has redeeming qualities. You see that deep down inside he's a nice guy. I always remember in Stasis League Series 2 that You Don't Even Like Me sequence where Rimmer's trying to persuade Lister not to go back in time and sacrifice himself to be with Kachansky. That brings us to another problem. They find her at the Ganymede Holiday Inn. They could just go home to Earth from the past at the Ganymede Holiday Inn. But anyway, Rimmer can't bring himself to say, I do like you actually, but you know that that's what he means. You're right, I don't like you. I don't like what you stand for. But deep down, I don't know, what's the point? I always found that sequence very striking.
Yes, me too. It's very easy when you talk about something you really like to focus on the bad points, the bits that ruin it for you, and I think that's why the word criticise has come to mean say there's something wrong with it rather than generally analyse something.
Yes, it's sort of been replaced with critique in that sense.
Yes, so it's not that we don't like Red Dwarf at all. We think it's very, very brilliant, particularly the initial 1988 to 93 run. But we mention these particular niggles about it because they're the only bits that spoil it. And they're worth mentioning in a critique. Craig Charles as Lister, you used to make the very interesting point that he's a very appropriate last human, being a kind of mix of races and a mix of characteristics, a mix of things we do like very much and know are a bit lacking about him. It's just humanity personified, all its good points and bad points and various ethnicities in one person.
Yes, I suppose the kind of thing they were writing on their sitcom outline is that he's not really an appropriate last human because he is kind of disgusting and never washes his socks and stuff. He has his dirty sock basket, his clothes are all covered in stains. He's a slob is the word they always use, and very lazy and gross, but he does also have all these hidden depths which allow the situation to take different interesting directions, I suppose.
That's very true. I quite like that summing up of him that the kids on the bus do in Back to Earth. Even though Back to Earth as a whole, I don't like that much, but even though he's disgusting, he's actually quite brave, and Lister himself uses that later in the episode in Back to Earth as, yes, that's true, and it's something I'm proud of. Quite a nice summing up there. They make a lot during the series of Rimmer and his self-loathing. Rimmer's very frustrated with himself, thinks he should have been an officer, and various things get in the way that aren't his fault. But really, probably, it is a lot his fault. It was because of his parents, because of his upbringing. No. Yes. But Lister, as I was noticing when we were watching it through this time, and I'm sure it's not the first time either of us has thought of it, has quite a bit of self-disapproval as well as Rimmer. I expressed it when we were watching it this time that Rimmer hates himself for his shortcomings and for underachieving. Lister is disappointed in himself for his shortcomings and for underachieving, but he likes himself. And I think that's true, isn't it?
Yes, he's got loads of potential. He's actually extremely gifted at kind of fixing things. And in the alternative universe in Dimension Jump, he's a kind of space engineer, isn't he? He makes spaceships. And we see him fixing his robot goldfish, and he fixes Crichton, not perfectly to explain why he's a different actor, come series 3, but he puts him together so he can do all that kind of thing, and he has a lot of very deep philosophical, very clever ideas about people and society and why things are the way they are, and he's very, very intelligent, and he hasn't wanted to do anything with that. The way they make him express it in the show is that he doesn't want to get tied down to a career. He wants to kind of be a free spirit and just generally bum around, have a few laughs. But then maybe being the last human 3 million years into space with really nothing to do with his life makes him regret that he didn't make more of himself.
It's one of the bits we like in Red Dwarf 10, isn't it? Where he makes the video for himself as his own dad and goes on about, "You're a disappointment to me, son," and stuff like that. Sums it up very nicely. And Craig Charles did it absolutely brilliantly and made it funny with collapsing and being drunk.
You drink too much. Absolutely knocking it back. And he falls off on one side of the screen, gets up again and immediately falls off the other side, and it takes a certain amount of comedy talent to make that work and be funny. But he's absolutely brilliant comedian. And he's very good at being himself, isn't he, if you see him on Pointless or the Red Dwarf Convention. It's just really engaging and funny, and I do think that Lister is method acting to a large degree.
Yes, Craig Charles started as, what does he call it, performance poet.
Spoken word poetry is what we call it nowadays.
And he came into the show off the back of that. And Chris Barry came in as the more famous, more experienced actor, which I guess is why, as you were saying to me recently, Chris Barry was always credited first, even though Lister was kind of the main character, the central character the show revolves around.
Yeah, the one who's in the situation of being the last human stuck in space. An interesting thing I read was that Rob Grant and Doug Naylor got in touch with Craig Charles, who did kind of edgy street poetry kind of stuff, wanting to know if in the script Cat was racist in the representation of a black character. And Craig Charles probably said, no, he's not, or perhaps he gave him some pointers. But I did read that, having read the script, he said to them, well, can I play Lister? He saw that it was a good role for him, and actually he's perfect for the role, so he was right.
The episode that I think sums up that how Rimmer and Lister feel about themselves rather well, even though I don't really like the episode very much at all overall, is the Inquisitor in Red Dwarf 5, where they have to justify themselves to themselves. And Rimmer, Inquisitor Rimmer, is saying to him, you're just a Weasley maggoty underachiever, aren't you? And Rimmer goes, yes. And the Inquisitor goes, so then justify yourself from that point of view. And Rimmer can justify himself to himself from that point of view. But Lister, as the Inquisitor, is very harsh with himself. You know what you could have made of yourself if you tried. You got brains, man. Brains you never used. And Lister really doesn't have an answer for himself for that, and thus he hasn't justified himself to himself.
There's also an element there that he doesn't really should have to justify himself, and he doesn't approve of what the Inquisitor's doing.
Which fits in with those parts of his character you were talking about. Interesting parts. I thought Craig Charles particularly was a beacon of making the show okay to watch in places when we got to Red Dwarf 7 and Red Dwarf 8, which overall are completely awful, as most Red Dwarf fans agree, as you can tell from the website. But Craig, I thought, was putting a lot into that and really leading the show very well, particularly when Chris Barry wasn't there. He is absolutely vital to Red Dwarf and really is the main focal point of it, Craig Charles, and has done so many excellent bits of work for it in so many different ways and deserves all the praise we've been giving him.
I'll tell you a difference between Rimmer and Lister that I find interesting and I always notice, and that's the way that they treat machines. And it's quite an interesting theme they have sometimes about kind of robot rights and computer rights. And Lister always speaks to Holly, the computer. Crichton, I mean, everyone does later on with Crichton treat him as a person, don't they? But in that Series 2 episode where he's David Ross, Rimmer's saying, it enjoys doing the tasks I give it, Lister. It makes it happy. And Lister's been trying to persuade Crichton that he needs to go off and do something for himself. There's no one to serve now, Crichton, that's the point. And he talks to him about his dream, about having a garden and stuff, find a planet with an atmosphere and do it. And they do spell it out a lot of the time, like when Holly gets, and it turns out to be all a practical joke by Holly, but as far as the audience knows and the characters know, he's getting superseded by another computer, Queeg, and Lister's saying, how do you think Holly feels? And Rimmer's saying he doesn't feel anything. The computer.
I like the way Lister says there, he still feels. I think that sums it up very nicely, that little exchange.
So they do spell it out a lot of the time, but then there's just kind of little things, like the way that they treat the Scutters. Rimmer finds them in the cinema and says, Scutters don't have time off. And then another time, possibly before that, Lister's planning to go into stasis until they get back to Earth, and I don't know why he and the cat didn't do that in the end, but anyway, the Scutters bring him a note saying, please don't go into stasis, please don't leave us with Rimmer, and he's crouching down to speak to them on their level and explaining to them why he needs to do that and that kind of thing, and really caring about their feelings.
They are awfully good, the Scotters, and they get a lot of character into these kind of motorised, hands-on boxes characters. It's quite extraordinary, and I think Lister's interactions with them is a huge part of bringing them to life and making them seem like real people, real beings.
Of course, one of them giving Rimmer a V sign is a good bit of characterisation, isn't it? They do, as you say, get a lot out of them.
I really like the Scooters. I think it's a shame when they don't bother to include them in the series where they're on Red Dwarf and the Scooters should be around, namely 5 and 10.
And 5, they're saying Rimmer's done this, Rimmer's done that, he's overrided the thing that lets Starbuck get back on the ship, and you're thinking, well, he must have told the Scotters to do it, but I don't think the writers have remembered that.
Danny John Jules as Cat. Now, he's the other actor and character, as well as Lister, who is in every single episode of Red Dwarf, and in his way is just as much a huge, integral, vital part of the show as Lister, and indeed Lister and Rimmer as a pair. And when we were watching it through, series 1 through, I was moved to remark the thing I'm enjoying about it most this time, and it's not that I haven't enjoyed it before very much, but it's striking me now as the bit I'm particularly enjoying, is Danny John Jules as the Cat. And in series 1, he doesn't really do anything very important to the plot. The cat race is very important to the plot, with waiting for God and everything, but the character himself usually only hangs around doing funny cat-like things. But that adds so much to the show, and it's so funny. Danny John Jules does it so well. We've mentioned and praised him, of course, in the May Marriott podcast, and he deserved that very much. And for his work as Cat, he deserves no end of praise, because he's absolutely done an absolutely wonderful job whenever he's come back to the role.
Yes, the role does change somewhat, and he becomes a lot less like a cat, which I expect we'll talk about. But that early stuff, that Series 1 stuff particularly, it's just like really having a cat nowadays.
We've always been cat owners since we watched the repeats, and it's always rung very true, all the cat-like things he's done.
Yeah, you're just like trying to get on with your life, and then the cat appears and it wants to be fed, it wants to go to sleep on your bed. Hey, 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 I'm back, feed me. And then Lister says, Cat, hi, where have you been? Investigating. It's very funny. And when I was young, particularly, the you can't have my shiny thing sequence is very funny, isn't it? He's found this yo-yo, which is a shiny yo-yo, and he's showing it to Rimmer, and Rimmer's looking on him with extreme contempt, of course, saying you don't have the slightest clue what it's for, do you? And Cat says, of course I do. You hold the shiny thing in one hand, and you go, wow, the string's moving. I just absolutely kill myself laughing at that.
That is probably the funniest cat bit in the show, I think. The strings moving ring very, very true, and it's absolutely hilarious.
Stop that string! Brilliant. And he's wiggling it himself, and it's like when you have a cat, the cat knows perfectly well you're wiggling the toy for it.
And it is in some ways a bit of a throwaway role, the cat, and somebody other than Danny John Jules could have come in and made it not at all work, made it just silly and not made it memorable. And perhaps he would have become a rather redundant part of the show, because, as you say, the role of actually being a cat isn't something that turns out to be very sustainable, and he is the main character that suffers a lot from they don't know what to do with him. But what they do give him to do, he always does so well and ensures that the cat always has a place in the show and we always want to see him, even though he is the one that the writers obviously don't find particularly interesting or sustainable. So thank goodness for Danny John Jules and his wonderful performance.
It's Dimension Jump, isn't it, where they're having this crash and they're using these boring magazines as a sedative.
Oh, yes!
And all the characters are reading out loud from these boring magazines, and Danny John Jules does it the best.
I absolutely love the Estonian Reds. He's absolutely, completely doesn't care about what this article is saying about European wines.
Estonian grapes are among the fruitiest and most subtle. And the spaceship crashing is really hilarious.
Absolutely brilliant. If you think of Red Dwarf 5, and what does the cat actually do in that? The answer is, well, nothing. There's episodes all about Lister and Crichton, which is not an unusual thing by that stage. There's an episode all about Rimmer and his emotional problems. What does the cat do? Just kind of hang around and say things, and because it's Danny John Jules, we still enjoy watching him do that. But it's not surprising to read that when they came away from Red Dwarf 5 and said, right, how are we going to sort it out in Series 6? I know, we'll get rid of Red Dwarf and set it all on Starbug, which is a bit of a questionable decision. And we're going to eliminate either the cat or Holly and develop the other one. And given where they'd taken all the characters by that stage, it's not surprising that it was those two they were choosing between.
I think part of the decision to keep Danny as the cat was that he had tenure because, of course, Holly changed actor. And I expect we'll talk about the actors when we get onto the character. But then did they really develop the cat? He keeps smelling and they're asking him, oh, can you smell the monster and stuff?
That's the only thing that's different about him, and they seem to have tried to develop with him in Series 6. And it's not really a huge development, but it's true, it would be wrong without him. And having Danny there and saying funny things is a vital part of the show. And I think if they had got rid of the cat, the show would certainly never have come back. Completely lost its audience.
Of course, the cat's origin story explained to me why he was a cat but a person. Lister brought on board the pregnant cat from Titan, who we get to see and is very cute. Craig Charles doing some brilliant acting there. You can see in the Smeg Outs tape the cat keeps running away from him, but he makes you believe that he has a relationship with his cat and he loves it. He cares about the baby cat and all that kind of thing. And that's the reason he goes into stasis, because you're not supposed to have an animal on the spaceship. And the pregnant cat is sealed in the hold and has kittens, and there's enough stuff, food and what have you, in the hold for them to evolve over 3 million years. And I thought, oh yes, now I get it. And in the episode you were talking about, Waiting for God with the cat race, you learn about what happened to the other cats, and they've made Lister their god, and they had a kind of version of what we've seen. Lister's dream of going to Fiji and opening a donut diner has become their idea of heaven. And what I'm trying to get to is the two arcs that went off on this pilgrimage looking for the promised land, obviously written with a mind to come back to the cat race and meet some other cats, which they never did, and there was a plan to do so, and they didn't do that, which is very annoying. It's got such huge potential for an episode.
Yes, when they realised that they were so over budget on Red Dwarf 7 and they had to cut back and film an episode with just the principal cast in as few sets as possible, they cut out the cat episode and made Duck Soup instead, where Cat was going to meet another cat. So that just goes to show they do find him a very throwaway character, and episodes about him kind of throwaway episodes, which is a shame.
Yeah, and I mean, why not do that earlier? Why not do it in Red Dwarf 6 when you're trying to develop him and they're flying around in Starbug, going to all these different sort of planets and things?
That would have fitted really nicely into Red Dwarf 6.
So that's a shame, but it's good that Danny John Jules is such a talented performer that he makes us always enjoy seeing the cat.
We were saying this time we're watching Series 1, it's nice that Frankenstein obviously realises and appreciates everything that Lister has done for her, sacrificing himself so that she and her kittens can live, the cat race can be born. She's only a black cat that tries to run away from him, but she's obviously taken it all in and understood what's going on. And that's nice to think of, that Frankenstein very much reciprocates Lister's feelings in that way.
And she's told her kittens all about it.
Yeah, it's really great. Because as we know, cats are very intelligent animals and they do understand a lot, and Red Dwarf just proves that. As I think we mentioned on the Maid Marian podcast, Danny John Jules is the one, we've both remarked to each other, who makes the most of the quite bad script work that Doug Naylor has done in series 10, 11, 12 this decade.
And I think we can say the same thing about Red Dwarf 8, can't we?
That's right.
I like that sequence where he's trying to get beaten up in the brig cafeteria. I'm stealing your fries from this big prisoner because he wants to get beaten up and sent to hospital.
Yeah, and really, Series 8, what a terrible mess and far too many characters it is. And unsurprisingly, the cat is horribly lost in that series. But when you do see him doing things like that, he shines through and he does absolutely make the most of it. When he's been doing the stuff for the newer series, this decade, Danny John Jules, okay, he can't really sustain the cat voice anymore. He's too old. Not that I want to sound ageist, but it's true, our voices change as we get old, and he obviously struggles. But the way he says some of the stuff that could be absolute nonsense, like, I come to tuck you in, tuck, 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 is absolutely brilliant, and has been entertaining to us, if not laugh out loud funny.
I thought Hitler died playing golf.
Exactly. And there's a joke that follows that about dying in a bunker. But the funny thing about it is the way that Danny just randomly says golf. It doesn't need a punchline.
Yes. Another sequence I'm remembering is where they're playing poker and he's giving away what kind of cards he's got, and then Lister's trying to show him how to do a poker face, and he's like turning his cards down on the table and looking at them and making a funny face and stuff, and then Cat trying to copy that. It's really funny.
So he always does so well. Danny John Jules is by trade a dancer and singer, and that's often helped him with his cat moves, his dance moves, and like John Travolta, he dances wherever possible. But the performing and acting and interpretation work he's done as Cat, as a comedy actor, have been absolutely first class. So even though he is the character that has been overlooked and forced into the background by characters that have become easier to sustain in an interesting way, Danny as the cat is an absolutely vital part of the show, and if ever it is or had been there without him, it wouldn't have been right, and he is absolutely brilliant. The fourth and final original main cast member is Norman Lovett as Holly the ship's computer, and it's not surprising to read that Holly was originally conceived as a voice-only role, and they decided to use Norman's face as well because they thought he did funny things with his face while saying Holly's lines in a funny, quite deadpan way, and I don't at all say that they're wrong about that. And Holly does have some very good sequences in Series 1 and 2. When we were watching Series 2, I felt Holly really became a part of the gang and started really gelling and having really good chemistry with the other three in the episode Queeg. And how unfortunate it is that that is Norman Lovett's penultimate episode, at least for a very long time. But the way he's interacting with the others there, Junior Colour Encyclopedia of Space, flashing me torch, turning it off, turning it on again, and the little summary he does with all of them. So long, Cat, I hope you finally fulfill your heart's desire and get your end way. And I particularly think of Rimmer saying thanks, Hole, to him, like talking to him like a person, not a machine that doesn't feel. I really felt he really became one of the gang in that episode. Not that he hadn't made lots of great contributions to the show before that, but he'd really had a journey and had become properly one of the four core characters. So, what a shame it was in many ways that the next episode after that, Parallel Universe, was his last for a very long time. It's very noticeable, indeed deliberately, that there's a big change in Red Dwarf between Series 2 and 3, in style, in scope, and, as it turns out, in cast. Norman Lovett is replaced with Hattie Hayridge as Holly, and Robert Llewellyn joins the main cast as Crichton. But it's not surprising to read that Series 3 was written to have this great change in scope and scale, but to have all the original cast. The lines for Holly were obviously written for Norman Lovett, and once you find out that the lines for Crichton were written for David Ross, who played Crichton in Series 2, as was mentioned, that's not a surprise either. You were saying when we were watching Series 3 this time how the lines all work with Robert Llewellyn in Series 3, but you can very much hear how they're supposed to be said by David Ross in his posh butler style of Crichton. So that's just a kind of accident, in a way, between Series 2 and 3, that the two new cast members add to the feeling of great change in the show. very much like Dumbledore accidentally changing actor, with the change in feel very much with the Harry Potter movies between the second one and the third one. But in many ways, it's a shame that Norman Lovett threw a bit of a wobbly and couldn't reach a compromise with the production team about rehearsal time and that sort of thing for Red Dwarf 3, and left the show and had to be recast. But they got Hattie Hayridge in his place, and I think we noticed all the time, every time we watched Series 3, that she was saying things that were written for Norman Lovett: the colour of space, your basic space colour, and so on. And it's hard for an actor to fill the shoes, or the face in this case, of another actor at the best of times. I think it's particularly hard for Hattie Hayridge coming in and saying someone else's lines as a face on a screen.
Yes, I think she avoids the mistake of trying to say them exactly as he would have said them, like that person called Richard who took Sooty over from Matthew. He just tried to copy Matthew. But she gave it her own style, like you were describing Norman Lovett as deadpan, but she puts more inflections in. She makes different faces. Norman Lovett's face, I don't know, it looked kind of natural a lot of the time, or didn't really do that much, or he would get cross sometimes and frown or something, but she kind of has this vacant expression on her face the whole time. Looks thick, especially when she's saying the lines.
Really fits in with Holly's computer senility that's taken over by that stage.
What we haven't mentioned is that she was in that episode Parallel Universe as Hilly, the female counterpart of Holly in this parallel universe, where there's a Deb Lister and an Arlene Rimmer and a dog instead of cat. The dog is a male dog, and that's very funny. It's what a cat and a dog would say to each other if they met, isn't it? I want to be your friend. And the cat's like, ugh, what is this? But anyway, back to Hattie Hayridge. She was telling me, and whoever else was watching in a documentary or something, that her stand-up comedy had been described by some reviewers or something as a female Norman Lovett, which I find a little bit sexist, actually, because you would never get that the other way around, would you? Mel and Sue are a female and a Dec. No one ever says and a Dec are a male, Mel and Sue. But anyway, that, the way I understand it, is what made Rob and Doug approach her and say, would you like to play the female Holly? She told this story about how she went up to Norman Lovett and said, oh, I'm so sorry, I wasn't trying to rip off your act or anything. She said all sorts of things about it. But then anyway, that really was her big break. They didn't anticipate needing a replacement for Holly, but there she was, and the audience would recognise her, and apparently Holly had fallen madly in love with Hilly in the parallel universe, so there's a reason for him to change his face to that face.
And Hattie's job certainly didn't become any easier during series 4 and 5, her other two series, as, like the cat, Holly did very much fade into the background as a character, and they didn't really bother to use her in very interesting ways anymore. And would this have been the case if Norman was still around? Well, possibly, because what is the reason that Holly becomes really superfluous to the show?
Crichton takes over the role of explaining, this is where we are, this is what's happening, this is what that creature is, and this is what it does, and this is why we're in danger, which you can imagine, or you may have seen it, the computer character would say all that stuff.
And this is very much a factor in Series 8, where Norman Lovett is back as Holly and in every episode, but there's nothing for him to do, and he really does just come on and say a couple of lines that Doug Naylor obviously thought were funny but aren't in every episode. And he's not even running the ship anymore at that one. He's playing the senile version of Holly loaded into Lister's watch. If he had no role in the show, or indeed she had no role in the show by the end of Series 5, there's absolutely nothing in Series 8. And I think that underlines the big problem I have with Series 8, really. Series 7 and 8 were supposed to get us back into Red Dwarf, back into the old status quo, and Norman Lovett was returning as Holly, the ship's computer, as you would expect, makes a lot of sense. As they say in the end of Red Dwarf 7, the nanobots have rebooted Holly, so he's back to his original personality face. Okay, but then with the new setup in Series 8, that's not how it turns out at all, and that's really, really, really bad for Holly, and I don't at all blame Norman Lovett for once again throwing a wobbly and refusing to do it anymore. Although he's obviously a bit of a diva anyway.
That's another one for your list, isn't it, of things that you read about and thought, oh, that sounds good, and then they were no good at all.
I'll say it now, shall I?
Yes, why not?
As it's relevant. When Red Dwarf 7 was coming on at the start of 1997, or 4 years, the videos have been a success, repeats have been a success, they got together and made this new series. In fact, 2 new series. They commissioned series 7 and 8 at the same time to be shown over the next 3 years. The Radio Times did a big feature on it with photos of all the cast, character profiles, preview, that sort of thing, and explained that series 8 was also commissioned. And one thing it said was, halfway through the series, which I took to mean series 7, but obviously really meant between series 7 and 8, the crew will find Red Dwarf, leading to the return of Norman Lovett as Holly. And I thought, oh wow, absolutely fantastic, that's what should happen. And the other thing that article said was, all the regular cast, including Chris Barry, are signed up for series 8. We knew at that point that Chris Barry had only appeared in 4 out of 8 episodes in series 7, because he'd said, oh, I don't want to do it anymore, and then he had so much fun doing series 7, he said, oh, actually I do, I want to sign up for series 8. So when we were watching Series 7 and Chris Barry was leaving, Rimmer was going off, I wasn't really invested in it at all. I thought, oh, well, he's coming back for the next series, I'll get back to Red Dwarf. They'll reboot his hologram disc somehow, and there he'll be, Rimmer back in the main cast where he should be. But that's not what happened at all. It was a new, living version of Rimmer, and living versions of all the old crew as well, chucking the status quo out of the window.
Of course, they said all the old crew, but the only one that we'd ever seen before was Mac McDonald as Captain Hollister, and people like Robert Bathurst as Todd Hunter weren't there, and I'm exaggerating actually, we saw Chen and Selby, didn't we?
A brief cameo in the first episode from Chen and Selby, and that really is the only 2 apart from Captain Hollister.
Yeah, Mark Williams, obviously much too famous by then to come back and be Peterson for a couple of episodes.
I was saying to you, how far is Chris Barry to blame? Can we blame him completely for all the problems with Series 7 and 8? The complete abandoning of the correct status quo, all the rubbish with 2 versions of Rimmer, the resurrection of the crew rather than getting back to Red Dwarf as we know it and want it, the continued quest on Starbug, dragging out and going with all that Ace Rimmer stuff along the way. How much is Chris to blame for all that?
It's hard to imagine that whole resurrecting the crew thing and the brig and all that was just to get Rimmer back. If they hadn't, or if Doug hadn't, he hadn't wanted to do that and thought it was a good idea, he'd have found some other way to bring Rimmer back. I also pointed out that the Series 7 normal episode with Chris Barry and they're going and interrupting the assassination of John F. Kennedy was a bad episode despite Chris Barry being there, so obviously Doug Naylor didn't have any good ideas. And by the way, the time drive is really the most annoying thing, potentially. Lister wants to get back to Earth, just a little bit of a tangent now, and whenever he thinks he has the chance to go back to Earth by going back in time or whatever, he's like, oh yeah, I can go home, hooray, and then he's really disappointed. They had the time drive at the end of Series 6, and we're still in deep space, but in the 14th century. Isn't that fantastic? They can't travel through space immediately with their time drive, and then things go wrong, and it's like, oh, look, Rimmer's destroyed the time drive, except they changed that ending as well. There's so many things wrong with this. It's all a gabble. But anyway, when they're getting the time drive, they have to strip down this and reconfigure that, and then they decide they must never have the time drive because they turn into corrupt a-holes in the future. And then at the beginning of Series 7, it's like, oh look, let's go and get the time drive again in this new timeline we've created. They just pick it up, they don't have to strip down or reconfigure anything. Oh, let's go back to Dallas in the 1960s. Why not just stay there then? It's so annoying. So things like that, getting back to the original point, really aren't anything to do with Chris Barry, are they?
I blame him about 90%. Although it's not directly his fault. But I truly believe Doug Naylor wouldn't have thought of resurrecting the Red Dwarf crew if he hadn't been thinking how to get Rimmer back in will resurrect him. And that's where the start point for the awfulness of Series 8 comes from. So, vicariously, the structural problems are Chris Barry's fault, but Doug Naylor didn't have to do it so badly.
By the way, why wasn't Kachansky resurrected with the rest of the crew? Because the Kachansky that they had to replace Rimmer in the show was from another dimension. Just makes no sense. And okay, space stuff generally doesn't make perfect sense anyway, but really you've got to have rules that make sense within your parameters.
Series 7 and 8 really should be expunged from existence. Let's talk about Robert Llewellyn as Crichton. Something of a breakout character. David Ross played Crichton in Series 2 in the episode Crichton in an absolutely hilarious episode, and David Ross had certainly played his part in making it very funny, but he was doing a play, so he couldn't be in Series 3. And they really went back to the wheelhouse for the character of Crichton, and Robert Llewellyn came in and did something very different with him, something very memorable with him, something very popular with him. So much so that after doing Series 3, 4 and 5, Robert Llewellyn was poached by the US to make the US version of Red Dwarf. And had that been picked up, which it wasn't, Robert Llewellyn wouldn't even have been available for Red Dwarf 6. Maybe they could have made that with Rimmer, Lister, Cat and Holly again. Make Crichton the one they got rid of to develop the others.
They wouldn't like that, would they? Because they valued Robert Llewellyn as Crichton so much.
Even after those 3 series, he was the one who they obviously thought was the crux of the show in many ways, and that's why I came away from Series 6 with that impression. Obviously, he's funny as Crichton and does some excellent work in Series 3, 4 and 5, but he's overdone and overused, really, isn't he?
Yes, it was interesting when we watched it most recently, because I hadn't really thought about him before, to track the development and what they do with him. In Series 3, I can't think of any kind of major things that he does, but what I am remembering is the things that he does with Rimmer, kind of getting abused by Rimmer, like in Backwards, they go to the Backwards universe, one of those times when Lister's all like, I'm home, but it's no good because everything's running backwards. And then into Series 4, still they're thinking Rimmer and Crichton, like they're together when they pair off in Meltdown. And a very interesting episode is DNA, where initially Cat and Lister pair off, and they do a brilliant sequence, don't they, where Cat's accidentally getting Lister caught in the DNA changing machine beam, making these really funny faces when he's trying to get out of it. Lister keeps saying, get Crichton, because he's fulfilling that role and knowing exactly what to do all the time, and right when it's too late, far too late, Cat's saying, I got a good idea. Why don't I go get Crichton? And in the meantime, Crichton and Rimmer are off being much less funny than that. And then later on in DNA, Crichton has become human, so then there's a lot of interaction between Crichton and Lister, and it is very, very funny. And that kind of thing, another Series 4 episode, Camille, there's a lot between Crichton and Lister, and it's Lister trying to kind of help him find his humanity and break his programming and not be obedient the entire time.
And again, in Camille, it starts, or very early on, you've got Crichton and Rimmer going off finding Camille, and Crichton and Rimmer into play they think are going to be good.
And then they're hoping that that will lead to the funny interplay between Crichton and Rimmer, where he's trying to call him a smeghead, which is so popular that they keep trying to redo it and rehash it. Well, they did once or twice anyway.
But then, as you say, it ends up all about Lister and Crichton. Rimmer and the Cat aren't even in the last sort of 6 minutes of Camille.
You're a smee that was very, very funny the first time. But Lister and Crichton was funnier, so from there you get what we like to call the Crichton and Lister show. So, like in Series 5 episodes, Inquisitor particularly, Rimmer and the Cat get erased very quickly by the Inquisitor, and it's Lister and Crichton trying to sort it out.
That really is the one where Lister and Crichton jumps the shark and becomes rather, they've overdone it, I think, the Inquisitor. The other interesting thing about Camille in Series 4, you've reminded me, is it sums up rather nicely what I was saying about the Cat, because they don't bother thinking of an ideal female companion for the cat to see Camille as, like they do for Rimmer and Lister. They just do a very cheap throwaway joke where the cat sees himself. He's the object of his own desire. What a pointless throwaway joke that's not particularly interesting for the character of the cat. But Danny John Jules makes it so funny, doesn't he? When he's walking down the corridor with Lister. Lister's going, what did you see? What did you see? And Danny says so well things like, what about it? My knees are shaking. And we know it's him and why it's funny that he's saying that. So, again, Danny makes so much there of the cat being treated with not that much respect as a character and a part of the show.
Yeah, so what else does he get to do in that episode? Tell Crichton what he thinks about the outfit he's got on to go on his date with Camille. Very funny line. Crichton, if I was going out with a hideous ball of green slime, that's what I'd wear. I think that's a very good answer, actually. He's kind of being rude, but kind of not really, because Crichton is going out with a ball of hideous green slime.
And we think, don't we, that it's all rather gone to Robert Llewellyn's head over the years, how he is the main thing that people want to see on the show, or certainly Doug Naylor wants to have on the show, and he's not really as good as he thinks he is.
Well, I've always kind of noticed, and only recently it started to actually annoy me, on the Smeg-Ups and the Smeg-Outs, he milks all the mistakes, his own and other people's, for more laughs. Which I don't think one tends to do if one doesn't think that one is the cat's pyjamas as a performer. And I shouldn't have said Smeg Outs, really, because they're mainly from Series 1, 2 and 3. In Series 1 and 2 he's not there, and in Series 3 he hasn't got his ego on yet.
And didn't we think in the Smeg-Outs from Series 12, maybe Craig Charles was starting to get a bit bored of Robert Llewellyn with his massive ego?
A couple of jokes he made. There's the episode where Crichton's feeling underappreciated, as well as that one, and someone shouts out, "We love you, Bobby!" And Craig Charles goes, "We bloody don't," or something like that, and everyone's, he's joking, but that kind of joke comes from something, doesn't it?
Many a true word spoken in jest. And the other person who has been a main core cast member is Chloe Annette as Christine Kochanski in Series 7 and 8. And like Cassie Hayridge, she comes into an ensemble cast of guys and has an unenviable job to do of trying to make her presence felt and having to read some rather stupid stuff and play... This isn't so true in the case of Hattie Hayridge, but play the woman, say things that are supposed to be funny because she's the woman. And given all these constraints on poor old Chloe Annette, I think she does a rather good job and adds quite a lot to Series 7 and 8 and is fun to watch.
Yes, I do think she does well with what she's given. I read something on the internet where some fan had said, oh, Kochanski from this universe and that universe, as I said that from different universes, are completely different characters. Claire Grogan's Kochanski, who was sort of recurring in Series 1 and 2, and then she has an appearance in Series 6. She's a party girl and one of the lads and that kind of thing, it was saying. And Chloe Annette Kochanski from the other universe is, obsessed with clothes and stuff, but I don't think that that was conscious at all, and I don't think it's really fair to say that they're different characters. That would imply that it had been done on purpose. It's a lot to do with the two actresses' performances, two different people are going to come across as two different people, especially when there isn't consistent characterization. Holly starts out as a senile computer and finishes up as a senile computer, although she does a bit better later on when all she really has to do is computer stuff and say, I have no record of your palm print things. But I think that Doug Naylor is a sexist and had no basis for the character of Kochanski except that she's a woman and she's on about shopping and makeup and what the men put in the fridge and that kind of thing, and I hate all that. It's such bad representation of women.
Rob Grant was right when he said, no, we shouldn't come back after Series 6. That's the whole show, that's the end. It's not going to be worth coming back to. And since then, for the past 20 years and more, it's been Doug Naylor alone. And I do think the show has suffered because of that. However, the cast have managed to get some brilliant bits out of it. We've mentioned some of them, Danny John Jules particularly, Craig Charles as well, particularly his I'm Disappointed in You Dave video. So they have been fun to watch at times, but really, series 1 to 6 is the proper Red Dwarf.
Yes, and we noticed, didn't we? There are fewer lols in Series 6. They only just got away with it.
They did, and obviously Rob Grant realised that, and having it all on Starbug and feeling a bit different, no Holly, I guess did give it a last zing of life, and yeah, it should have ended with the original ending scene, which you can see on the Smeg Ups tape.
Yes, the one that I was blurting about earlier when I was saying how annoying it was with the time drive.
Rimmer's completed his personal journey, and that's all great, and we're going to catch up with Red Dwarf soon. The end, and that should have been it.
Yeah, and they're drinking urine recyc, which is a link back to a joke they were having earlier.
That's right, we don't get to see the punchline with the foam moustache that you can only remove with taps. So that's all the characters talked about in detail, and in doing so, we've said a lot of things about various episodes and aspects we like and don't like about the series, which is good, because it's a good way to say those things. But to finish off, let's sum up our feelings about each series, perhaps mentioning favourite episodes and overall feelings. So Series 1. I really like Series 1, the unique atmosphere it has. I'm all alone, more or less. Great cast interplay, very funny, and always worth watching, laughing at, enjoying.
Yes, I think probably the best series, with all the original brilliance, not having to branch out, being entirely confined to the ship.
Series 2 is very like Series 1 in a lot of ways, and is good for a lot of the same reasons. I do like the slight bit of branching out it does. A bit of location filming for Better Than Life, or guest characters with Crichton, Queeg, Parallel Universe, that sort of thing.
Lisa Yates and Lister's memory, which he gives to Rimmer.
Overall, a very successful series, building on what works in the first very well. And I might have said, if pressed until quite recently, Crichton was my very favourite episode of all, but it certainly contains what I think is the very funniest sequence of all, with Crichton being the android version of Norman Bates. I think the first thing we should do is bury them. You're that sure they're dead. That sort of thing. David Ross, as I say, plays his part in that very well.
Oh, the three actors' faces when they see the skeletons. That's brilliant. The reacting, the action and the reaction.
So again, that's part of the 4 original main cast, including Norman Lovett, although he's not in that particular scene, coming together and really gelling. So yeah, Series 2, also excellent. Bit more scope than Series 1, builds on the successes of Series 1.
Same, I think, about Series 2, although I said Series 1 was probably really the best series. I think if I had to choose which one to watch for the rest of my life, I'd choose Series 1.
Yes, me too. It's very effective, I think, the beginning of Series 3, where you get the old, slow opening sequence transmogrifying into the new, exciting, this is how things are going to be, things are going to blow up, we're going to meet alien-like things from now on, the show's taking a new direction, which in many ways is necessary.
Yeah, that's right. The atmosphere of the opening of those first 2 series, I must mention that. It's brilliant. You see, presumably Lister in the spacesuit painting the ship, and then it's the arm of the F, and you pan out, and it's this massive ship, and then it's all this massive space. It's so slow, there's nothing around, and you get this feeling that he actually is all alone in deep space, which is, supposed to be the premise of the show, and as you're saying, it does get into a more kind of space adventuring, faster pace type thing, and it does feel less like he's alone.
Which is one of the reasons that the digital remastering of the first 3 series was so bad, and they stuck in fast-paced, action-packed openings for Series 1 and 2, which don't at all fit in with the style.
Well, everyone hated the digital remastering and changes that they made, like things shooting past the window as well they were doing. It's much better just to have black space outside the window.
That makes it kind of fundamentally a different show from Series 3 onward, but in many ways it's not as good as the feel of Series 1 and 2, but it does make the show more sustainable, because 6 series of hanging around the spaceship would run out of steam, so they were right to do it for Series 3. And in many ways I think Series 3 and 4 are a bit of a peak in terms of comedy, in terms of space adventuring ideas. Not in every way a peak, in many ways Series 1 and 2 are, but we certainly get a lot of laughs out of Series 3 and 4.
Series 3 has some episodes that you kind of could have in Series 2, doesn't it? Like, for example, Body Swap. That's all confined to the ship. So I always think of it as kind of a transition. There's been a big change, and then it kind of goes all the way to that change when you get into Series 4. And when I was young, I used to say that Series 4 was my favourite. I don't know if it was really, or if I just like to say it was because I thought you had to have a favourite of everything. But it has got some very, very funny episodes like DNA and Camille, which we mentioned. I enjoyed Meltdown so much it inspired me to write a story at school with some of the characters who were wax droids, and the ones that I didn't know who they were I replaced with Robin Hood and stuff, but it had Marilyn Monroe and Elvis Presley in it. And perhaps when you're young, those later series are more stimulating. And now that I'm older, I do prefer the more slow-paced kind of atmosphere that they achieve with the first series particularly, and also the second.
Speaking of Meltdown, I was moved to remark when we watched it this time how Rimmer in that, after he's been driven a bit crazy by Lister chewing his light bee, and we hate the concept of the light bee anyway, becomes in that episode as bad a character as, without any redeeming qualities, ruthless, awful, the Pratt version of Rimmer Extreme, like he is in kind of series 11 and 12. But in that case, it's just how he is. He hasn't had to have his light bee chewed first, which just goes to show how Rimmer is misused in later series from this decade.
In Meltdown, with his performance, he's given it a kind of insane vibe, isn't he? And shouting ridiculously right in their faces and stuff, as if to say, well, this isn't what Rimmer's normally like, he's not this bad. Whereas later on he's behaving in the same kind of way, but acting more normal.
As I say, when we watch series 11 and 12, I'm not surprised Chris takes every opportunity to have some fun with his impressions and stuff, because he can't really be enjoying playing such a crap version of Rimmer after all that time. Series 5, I think, is noticeably worse than anything else so far, and the show does jump the shark in many ways, as we've mentioned, particularly with Lister and Crichton. Back to Reality in Series 5 is always, I've seen from the website, voted as a fan favourite episode. We've never liked it that much, have we? But we were moved to remark this time how much we enjoyed Timothy Spall's performance in that episode, being the guy who works at the Red Dwarf computer game place and putting so much into a role that could be very nothing and making it very funny.
And he coined the phrase the Pratt version of Rimmer, of course.
Yes, indeed, that's what I was thinking of him earlier. Elsewhere in Series 5, Quarantine, we do enjoy quite a lot, don't we?
Quarantine was hilarious the first time. I suppose when you know that Rimmer's going to be dressed in the gingham frock and have Mr. Flibble, the penguin puppet, whispering him things and stuff like that, it's not quite so funny.
Demons and Angels I used to say I liked quite a lot. I don't know if I like it that much. Mum always used to say she hated that one.
You like things where there's the good and evil version of something, don't you?
I do. I suppose Terraform is quite redundant about Rimmer's psyche in many ways. The Inquisitor I've never really liked that much. It's just not as good as it has been, and a bit stale, I think, Series 5.
Yeah, I do think Back to Reality is one of the better Series 5 episodes, actually. I like that sequence where it's revealed that they are hallucinating, so we're seeing them on Starbug, like running around, sitting on boxes, and it's the car and stuff, and they're talking about all these ambitious kind of chase sequence stuff that they're doing that would not be possible for this show. That bridge, I think we can make it. They just make it really funny. Of course, it's the cast making it work. But I think the reason people vote for it as the fan favourite is that it got them, didn't it? Made them think, oh no, is it true? Was it all a VR game? But of course that didn't work on us, because when we saw it, they showed it first.
Yes, that's right. They messed up the airing order of Series 4 and 5, or changed it up anyway, in that repeat run in the mid-90s. And they started Series 5 with Back to Reality. It was a stupid thing to do. Obviously the final episode in the series. And we said about Series 6, they just got away with it. A bit of a shake-up that allows them to just get away with it for another series, and it should have ended in that particular way. I was moved to remark this time how it did the retrospectives for stuff we'd enjoyed in the show so far. Ace Rimmer, Dwayne Dibley, the Polymorph, and that was looking back and acknowledging those things and doing something slightly different with them at the end. So that when, in the later series, the 21st Century series, Doug's reusing ideas like There's No Tomorrow, they're just coming across as recycled and tired and, oh dear, we saw this 20 years ago and it's much better. It just goes to prove how Series 6 should be. The end. It successfully revisits a few funny, memorable things and reminds us of them as we wind down.
Studio audience love it, don't they, when they see Dwayne Dibley or something again. Or Talkie Toaster, my god, he's not funny anymore. But then, after they've gone, look at that, they're not going to want to watch it again, are they? They want to go back and watch the original.
Talkie Toaster is one of those bits of book continuity, Red Dwarf book continuity, that slips into the show and supersedes the original Series 1 and 2 continuity, including things like Lister Never Went Out with Kachansky. And that was something that used to annoy me about the show. Rob and Doug apparently liked their book continuity much more, and the show became kind of a sequel to the books in many ways, rather than to the TV series.
Why didn't they decide their continuity before they started and make it the same?
Yeah, it's very annoying, and I'm glad we remembered there to slip in a mention of it. We talked about the change around between Series 6 and 7, and the fact that Series 7 draws out being on Starbug for too long and is awful in many ways. The one episode that I think could be taken away from that and put into a proper series and made work is Epideme. And we mentioned in the Dreamstone podcast Gary Martin as Epideme doing some rather fun voice work. They've obviously had a big budget for Series 7, and they do lots of VR stuff, Pride and Prejudice, the jousting thing, and, well, they don't come across that well, and the money, I don't think, has been used that well. Series 8 I absolutely hate, and we've sort of gone into why. It's just not Red Dwarf. It's not the Red Dwarf continuity. There's not supposed to be all those characters. And the funny bits are when the proper characters are making something of lines that really aren't that good. And the one episode from that I think could be taken out and put in a decent series is Cassandra. Except it wouldn't be a canary mission. It would just be the guys going off in Starbug and finding Cassandra.
Yeah, things would have to be a little bit different. They use another character to die in place of Rimmer. And actually, that reminds me, that's a problem I have. They start just throwing away lives, human lives, for comedy, which doesn't seem right at all. And I was thinking as well, I have a real problem with Lister pouring the tube of sexual magnetism virus on Rimmer in prison, and we're laughing because all these big beefy prison guys are pouncing on him. But what happens next? That's not funny, and it's not something that Lister would do to Rimmer. So a lot of problems with the comedy and the characterization there.
And very much linked into that point is the original ending of Series 8. I was saying Series 6 should have had the original cut ending, and it should. And I have been heard to say Series 8 should have had its original cut ending, and I think on the whole it should. All through that series I was waiting for the continuity to be back to how it should be. The guys on Red Dwarf, the rest of the crew had gone for some reason. I never dreamed that would last for the whole series. I thought it was going to be the initial 3-part episode and then we'd be back to normal. So I was disappointed at first to see on YouTube the cut ending where the gang, Rimmer, Lister, Cat, Crichton, Holly, Kachansky, have Red Dwarf to themselves again and are pleased about it. I see no ship, says Rimmer, as the rest of the crew are denied entry back onto Red Dwarf, and everyone seems very pleased about that. And certainly it would have made me very pleased as a viewer at the end of the series. But, as Rosie very correctly points out, there's a big problem with it.
I have a real issue with Lister being pleased about that. After all this craving human company, desperately wanting to get home, when he hears about the accident, this is terrible, he says in the first episode when he hears all the crew are dead. Why is he conga lining round the ship singing and pleased when the rest of the crew are off stranded in space? That's not right at all.
Then 10 years later, Dave brought back a very much more mature, nay, elderly cast of Red Dwarf for a reunion special to show round Easter 2009 back to Earth. And like Back to Reality, it kind of teased us that, it's all not what you thought it was, and then, it is at the end. And as I was saying to you earlier, in relation to Jurassic World actually, I thought as a kind of reunion, one-off, bit of fun, bit of nostalgia, that was okay. The problem comes, I think, when they try and carry on the whole thing. Reuse all the old stories, try and breathe new life into it when it really should have just been a bit of that was fun, wasn't it? And we've done it again. Well, that's the end. But it's not that good, Back to Earth, but it has some bits that made us laugh the first time we saw it, like the sci-fi shop owner and his you could beam, and that's Star Trek. We don't do that, sir, and things like that. As I say, it was a decent retrospective that brought back some good old Red Dwarf feelings, but I think it should have been the end. But it wasn't the end, and they came back for Red Dwarf 10, and I thought when they did come back for Red Dwarf 10 on Dave, they're planning that as the end. And indeed, it seems that they were originally, because I was reading how it was building up to them finding Kachansky again, and that probably would have been the end. But then they completely rewrote the final 2 episodes, so they didn't involve finding Kachansky, and kind of said, well, here's the status quo, here's the future series, which I think was rather a mistake.
Yeah, they've forgotten all about Kachansky. They even keep making references to Lister being the last human. But he's not, is he, if Kachansky's out there?
It's really noticeable. In Series 10, they mention both Kachansky and Holly, who are the 2 regulars who aren't around anymore, as if, we might see them again and then that'll be the end. And then in Series 11 and 12, they don't get mentioned. They're not on their Kachansky quest. They are trying to spin things out. And of course, Norman Lovett turns up as Holly at the end of Season 12 for a bit of a cameo. That's the only mention he gets there. And they're very much saying, oh, look, we can carry on from here. And I have read that Red Dwarf 13 has been commissioned by Dave, and they're looking to film it next year. And, well, how much longer are they going to keep making crap Red Dwarf? Till Robert Llewellyn dies? Possibly so.
You were telling me recently that some of Doug Naylor's sci-fi ideas are not bad, weren't you? He can't really get comedy out of them, but the cast kind of can sometimes. But it's true. It's particularly the sort of dystopian ideas, the world without criticism, the predictive computer, taken from predictive texting that makes you write absolute nonsense. But yes, trying to carry it on in Red Dwarf as a comedy, it's not working quite so well, is it?
That's very true. I did say that when we were watching Series 10, 11 and 12. And really, that's our feelings about all the different series summed up there quite nicely, isn't it?
Yes, there's not really differences between those last series that we can pick apart. They're pretty much the same sort of thing.
Although I do think Series 11 has the slightly better episodes. It got to the point when we were watching Series 11, mainly thanks to Danny and Jules, I was quite looking forward to the next episode.
Wow.
Then it was really, really disappointing. But Series 12, I think, is mostly awful. The only one I thought was okay was Crichton and Rimmer trying to get elected as the electronic representative by the machines, but it wasn't pulled off that well.
And that's the one where they rehashed Talkie Toaster, and you were very impressed, weren't you, when I got that on the first possible opportunity.
You called it, absolutely. Very good. Yeah, so Rob Grant was right. Red Dwarf had its day and came to a good ending, and it shouldn't really have kept being brought back when really it should have been over a long time ago. But we always watch it and get some enjoyment out of it and have opinions to say about it because it has been a very important part of our life and something we've enjoyed very much. So there we are, plenty of thoughts about Red Dwarf, past, present, and, unfortunately, future. Hopefully you'll join us again next time, which will be the final Sunday in September, for a podcast on
something very different than Wizard of Oz. That is the classic film starring Judy Garland.
So until then, good night out there.
Whatever you are.